everybody. Welcome back. Today's lecture is going to be just an absolutely mind-blowing lecture that you are going to remember for the rest of your life, and you're going to make a great contribution to your community in terms of racial justice. And Professor, she's a brand new PhD, by the way, from Berkeley. Yay! But I just let you know that I'm wearing 49ers jacket. So for Kaepernick and his cause, and I believe the sports, in fact, in and of itself, is a vehicle for social change and the integration of baseball is since 1900s, and of course now we have a football and here it is. We are, in fact, of course, I can miss out, Muhammad Ali, the great upper jack that he has. So here it is. Today is going to be one of the best days intellectually and for you to carry on this conversation for the rest of your life. I would like to go into introduction to Dr. brand new PhD from Berkeley, Delgado. I have known her quite a bit in a number of years. And when I asked her to do some presentation about 2 years ago, for you to give a presentation in this social change lecture series, you have to wait 2 years because they are already done with a number of people up to fall of 2018. So those of you who are interested, the continuing lecture series or topics, go to www.glendale.edu/ and cultural diversity. And you will have the presenters and the names of the titles of their presentation, and you're going to have a good time. All right, now I would like to introduce our lecturer, Dr. Ziza Delgado. It's a very colorful here. In this interactive presentation, Dr. Ziza Delgado will guide the audience through a brief history of the field of ethnic studies and the legacy it has left for educators today. Dr. Delgado will discuss how a critical ethnic studies framework can be utilized by educators, students, and community members from diverse backgrounds to advocate for social justice. The intention of this presentation is to initiate critical dialogue among our GCC community as a starting point for reflecting on systematic, very institutionalized racism and inequality in order to develop a deeper understanding of how we can individually and collectively take action to transform our society. Ziza earned her PhD and master's degree in ethnic studies from the University of California at Berkeley. Ziza is extremely proud to be a GCC alumni. Yes. Who successfully transferred to UC Berkeley in 2006 to earn her BA in history. Dr. Delgado is currently an adjunct instructor in ethnic studies and history at GCC. Additionally, she teaches for San Francisco State University, University's Race and Resistance Studies. Wow, that sounds really fantastic. Resistance Studies program in the nation's first and only College of Ethnic Studies. Today, Ziza conducts research on and teaches about race, racism, social movements, education, the history of ethnic studies, women's history, and U.S. history. Her research analyzes the potential of education to empower historically marginalized populations through liberatory curricula and pedagogy. Let's welcome Dr. Delgado.
Thank you, Jiwon, for that introduction. I hope I live up to it. Thank you all of you for being here. It's so nice to see a full room of mentors, colleagues, family, past students, current students, and I'm just really excited to have the opportunity to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. What I'm arguing is a necessity for critical ethnic studies and our need to be able to understand and talk about race. And I'm using these two events, Colin Kaepernick's protest and the protest at Standing Rock, as examples for how we can teach about a critical ethnic studies and how we can look at our world from this framework. So for those of you who got here a little late, please take out your cell phones. The first thing we're going to do is I want to engage with you and learn who's in the room with me. How are you all thinking about race? How are you thinking about these topics? So pull out your cell phones. So I'm going to look around. Most of you got here a little early. We're able to sign up. All right. One more minute. I want to get as many people. We have a full room, and I really want to know how you all are thinking about this topic, because I want to know how I can make this relevant to you. I have something already prepared, but what I choose to emphasize will depend on how you all are already thinking about these topics. All right, so we're going to jump into it. So it should be A, B, C, or D. So A for today, B for this week, C for this month, D, I don't remember. All right. Anybody responded yet? Hey, it works. Okay. Today, seen a lot of this week, a lot of I don't remember. That's so important because when I do this activity with my class, a lot of times people say, I don't remember. And that's really helpful for me because that lets me know how people are talking about this, how often you're talking about this. All right. So mostly we have people talking, so we have either people talking about it a lot, like today or this week, or I don't remember. Okay, that's good. I'm going to move on to the next one. All right. So you just stay in the same screen. You don't have to change anything. Okay, when I talk about race, I feel. It can just be a word. It can be a sentence. Off. This is real. Let's be honest. Let's be vulnerable. Let's open up. I want to really know how you feel when you talk about race. Black Lives Matter too. Horrible, invigorated, conflicted, engaged. A. I like that. We're mixing it up. Okay. Open-minded, confused. That's a big one. Cautious. Depending on who you're talking to, will also change how you feel in that moment. Is it different when you're talking to your partner, when you're talking to your professor? Engaging, exhilarated, open-minded. Nice. Okay, I like it. All right, so we have all the range of emotions, which is common. We're angry, we're fearful, we're cautious, we're scared, we're open-minded. I like to see that some people are comfortable, some people are uncomfortable, frustrated, vulnerable. I appreciate that. Like I'm advocating for my race. Ooh, how often do you feel like you have to be the one who represents your entire race? So many of us who come from communities of color, if we make it, if we transfer, if we don't, what the implications are for our entire population. Okay, awesome. So that really helps me. It helps me because at the core of my argument today, what I'm here to present to you is a concern I have. A concern I have that we are actually in a moment where we have a crisis of connection. And what that means is that every week, this week alone, we have seen so many African American folks in the community losing their life because of interactions with the police. We are seeing the largest protest in Native American history. How many people have heard about the Standing Rock protest? Maybe half, less than half. And that's also part of the crisis. It's part of the crisis that media isn't talking about this. The largest protest in Native American history, in U.S. history of Native American tribes. Over 20 tribes have come together. And over half of the class has not heard about this event, the audience. We're consistently seeing that certain people get treated differently when it comes to their interactions with the police. That a white man who shot at the police, he gets shot at with a beanbag. That Dylan Roof, who killed 9 innocent African-American people in their own church, somehow makes it out alive, makes it out with a bulletproof vest on, and even gets to go have a snack at Burger King on his way to the jail. And we're seeing this week in Charlotte after another man, a father, waiting for his son to get home from school, to get off the bus, shot and killed. And we're seeing protests, and we're seeing people angry. So those emotions that you're having are a reflection of the emotions that we're having in society, that lots of people are having. And we're seeing mothers and women leading this movement, women leading Black Lives Matter, and talking about what does it mean to be the mother of a Black child in this country? What does that mean to not know if your child is going to come home at the end of that day? So with that, I have a few objectives in mind for us today. The first is that I really want us to develop our understanding of the field of ethnic studies, because it's both a manifestation of our collective resistance, and maybe most importantly, it's a resource for transformation. We're going to discuss the origins and the visions of ethnic studies. What did they want? What did they envision for the future of this field when they created it? And we're going to, most importantly, practice using a critical ethnic studies framework. And then lastly, we're going to recognize that ethnic studies and critical ethnic studies and social justice and restorative justice are all resources that we can use to address this major theme that I'm talking about today, which is the crisis of connection. All right, so while I'm up here talking, I want you to know that you have a responsibility and an action and something that I want you to be doing during this presentation. And so what I like about this visual is it represents these kind of tensions in society for those of us who are concerned about creating change. The first way I want you to think about this presentation is, what can I do, the personal, in my everyday life, as a teacher, as a student, as an athlete, right? As a mother, as a father, as a community member, as a health worker and a social worker, what can I do with what we're going to talk about today, with this knowledge that I've learned? And then what can I do? So given what we want to do, given the crisis that I've just mentioned, there are structural limitations, and we know that those are real. So what are the structural limitations in place? What can an individual educator do within this space? We have administrators here. We have faculty members here. We have people who are part of the guild here. We have students who are in student government here. So thinking about the structures that we're all a part of, what can I do within these structures? And then lastly, what can I do? What are the strategies that we have in place to think about knowing what we're going to talk about, knowing where we want to go, knowing the limitations, then what are the actual strategies I can put in place to see and affect change? We have people who are coaches and mentors and counselors in here, and we all have a role, something that we can do. And so even though the content of what we're talking about today is heavy, it's heavy for a reason, because people are dying. And at the same time, we have agency. There is something that each and every one of us can do. So I want you to be thinking about that as we're talking. What can I do here as an individual, institutionally, structurally, and what can my everyday actions do? What can the strategies be to affect change? The framing for this, understanding, why do I need to talk about the history of ethnic studies? Why don't I just jump into what's happening today? Because we need to know the origin. And it's the same reason we need to know the origin of oppression in this country, of economic exploitation, of racial injustice, of white supremacy. Because this conversation is based on, if we do not know the past, we can't understand the present. So in order to understand the present and to analyze it, we need to know the past so that we can actually do something about it. That was Malcolm X, gave us that. All right. So a crucial component of my presentation today, part of this crisis of connection I'm arguing, is the fact that we don't know how to empathize in this country. And one of the reasons we don't know how to empathize is because of the ideologies of American exceptionalism and especially American individualism. It tells us, do for me, do for my family, work hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Anybody can make it if they just step on the other person, okay? And that is counteractive to growing empathy. And that I believe that to address these crises that we have today, we actually have to grow and develop our empathy. And all of us are empathetic beings to begin with. We care about our families, our loved ones, our children. But one thing we're not good at doing is caring about people who are different than us. And so what empathy asks us to do is it asks us to understand what another person is experiencing from within that person's frame of reference. And I know this is not a small task. This is probably one of the most difficult things we can do in society. To try and undo all of our personal experiences, everything that we live and know every single day, whether that's privilege, whether that's exploitation or oppression, and actually try to put ourselves in somebody else's footsteps and their experiences and what they're going through. But one of the reasons I know that we have to do this is because we've never actually done it well. And Ella Baker reminds us of that. If this quote is reminiscent to you of what's going on today, it should be. She reminded us in the 1960s that until Black men who are Black mothers' sons become as important to the rest of the country when they are killed, become as important as a white mother's son, until that moment happens, that we don't have freedom and we can't actually rest. Not only do we not have freedom, but we can't rest. That means we have to be active and we have to do something about this. So this is Ella Baker giving us a call to action in 1964. We still haven't reached that place, but I think that we are in a moment today where we are seeing movements that are pushing us to think about these questions and really take them seriously. So when we talk about the origins of ethnic studies, we're talking about a movement that was born out of independent, anti-colonial struggles by people who identified as third world. Today, that language doesn't really sit with us. We don't really know what third world means. But at the time, what they decided with the people who came together, especially in 1955, at a conference called the Bandung Conference, which was all third world communities and countries, and they didn't allow any European nations there. They said, nope, this one's for us, actually. And we're going to decide the future, the course of our future for all of our people who've been oppressed and who've been colonized. And some of them had already achieved their liberation from the colonial countries, and some of them were in the process. But what they decided at that moment was that self-determination would be key. And during the 1960s, 30 nations from Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, achieved their independence. And so it was real for students of color. That change, that radical and revolutionary change was possible because they were seeing it all throughout the world. So there are so many things that influence the development of ethnic studies. We have the youth insurgents in the civil rights movement, youth deciding that they were going to take an active role. They were going to participate in sit-ins. They were going to go to the South. They were going to register voters. They were going to boycott racist businesses. We also have the rise of Black power, which is crucial to the ideological and psychological development of this radical frame of reference for students who established ethnic studies. The Black Panthers were saying, we're going to feed our community. And you know what? We're going to police our community. We're going to police the police because the police are killing us. And at that time, it was legal for people to carry weapons. And it was actually because of the Panther that became illegal for citizens to go around and have concealed weapons. So, these things are all connected, right? And people were afraid. People were afraid because Black militants were going around and they were following the police in their own cars. And guess what? They knew the law. They knew the law really well. And that intimidated people. But what it also did was it inspired a whole generation of students to think about how they could serve their community. In Mexico City, 1968, most of us have seen this picture of Tommie Smith and John Carlos, but also most people don't know that they were just two of many students who participated in the Olympic Human Rights Project. These were athletes who decided that they were going to take a symbolic stand and challenge the racism that was going on in their home country. And that's really hard, because if you think about it, for an athlete, for many athletes, the Olympics is the pinnacle of your career. You are risking everything. And they risked and they lost a lot for this protest. And it's not lost on many of us how much this influences Colin Kaepernick and what he's doing today. and getting specifically into the creation of ethnic studies. So those were all kind of the larger issues that were influencing students to think about their world and their community and the things that they wanted that they weren't getting. And at San Francisco State in 1968, students initiated the longest strike in U.S. history. And that strike resulted in the creation of a College of Ethnic Studies, the first and remains only College of Ethnic Studies in the nation. And at the core of their demands was that we want courses about our history, taught by people from our communities who actually care about our communities. Because there were people teaching about Black history, but they weren't Black often. And they were teaching about it from a deficit framework, about what African Americans were not. And for many of these groups, like Native Americans, there was nobody teaching this history. And if they were, it was from a problematic standpoint. Oftentimes an anthropological outsider going in and talking about how savage and backward and uncivilized these people were. So they said, no, actually, you know what? We want to create something for ourselves. We want to see ourselves in all the great things our communities have done. And that spread throughout the Bay Area, spread to UCLA, spread to Cal State Northridge. And at UC Berkeley, the TWLF was formed at the same time that the strike was happening at State. And after months of their strike at UC Berkeley, and the two students, they were supporting each other. Students were going from State to Berkeley. Berkeley was supporting Richmond oil workers, oil refinery workers. The workers were going to Berkeley to support the students. It was this beautiful moment of student-worker solidarity. The campus workers jumped on and supported the call for demand for ethnic studies, and many faculty eventually, especially when the National Guard came in and dropped tear gas on the campus, said, we got to stop this. Give them what they want. Even if they didn't agree with it, they're like, we can't go on like this on this campus. And so out of this moment of struggle where students, first generation students, the first in their family, risked everything to study ethnic studies, to create ethnic studies for all of us. And I don't want that to be lost, because that's really important. That people risked everything. They got injured. They were arrested, kicked out of school. Some people never went back to Berkeley. First in their family, they could have been the first in their family to get a Berkeley degree, and they never got back so that we could have ethnic studies. So what did they actually accomplish? And my argument is that they created a field of study that provides a framework for analyzing and, this is crucial, transforming our society. It's not just about studying the past, separate, something that happened 200 years ago. Slavery was something that happened 200 years ago. That genocide happened in the past, and we have some folks who still survived. It was about how that knowledge, how those experiences could actually transform the present. So then, what is critical ethnic studies? Well, we know it was birthed from a social movement for justice based on, and this is crucial, solidarity among people of color and also white allies. There were many white graduate students who went on the picket lines and also risked everything to support the development of ethnic studies, and white faculty who saw that there was a need for this field of study. And given the topic of our talk today, it was based on building connection between diverse communities and the necessity of that. So almost 50 years later, where are we? What does critical ethnic studies actually look like today? So the first thing is that it recognizes that the dominant narrative is incomplete. And for those of you who don't know, who haven't taken my class, the dominant narrative is the Eurocentric, white, patriarchal, hegemonic, upper class, elite perspective that has dominated and controlled politics, ideology, who works what jobs, who gets deported, who we want here to do the work for us. It also recognizes that the narrow perspective of the dominant narrative is insufficient for understanding our complex society today. That the dominant narrative doesn't actually help us understand where we're at. And that's why we have so many people who don't know how to talk about race, who don't know how to feel because they feel insecure. They feel afraid when they see certain people. They don't know why they feel that because it's so deeply embedded in our society. They believe in the criminal justice system and the way it is functioning today because the people in jail are bad people. They should be locked up. That's what the dominant narrative has been socializing us and telling us for a long time. But it doesn't actually help us understand where we're at. It also utilizes the counter narrative which we argue provides a more complete, and this is important, accurate understanding of American history. It's not just, this is our opinion over here and that's your opinion. It's that, no, these are facts. For better or worse, Columbus wrote down exactly what he did. He wasn't shy. We have his journals where he told us, these people are so kind, the Arawaks, oh my God, they gave us everything we wanted, they fed us. They will make great subjects. We'll be able to dominate them. So again, this is not perspective, our opinion. These are things that are rooted in experiences, in facts, in research. And it's research that we now have because the field of ethnic studies is almost 50 years old. And lastly, and this is the most important thing, from a critical ethnic studies perspective, all of that, the knowledge that we share, the work that we do, the whole purpose is that it provokes action. That what we learn has implications for how we live. When my students come to class, we talk about how they're going to use and transform the things that we're talking about in their lives. Are you going to be a nurse? Let's talk about the disparities in pain treatment given to African Americans and how they're given less pain treatment in the medical fields. Are you going into environmental work? Let's talk about how Native Americans live on the most polluted land in this country and people of color are exposed to more toxins than any other group because of environmental racism. It's making it relevant. Because if it's not relevant, if what we're teaching isn't relevant, our students won't care. They're going to come in, they may do well, they may be awesome, they may get A's in our class. And they will never retain that. So it's my opinion that we have to make everything that we do relevant. So how is this different from mainstream curricula? We examine certain things, and this is not to say that history, political science, sociology don't do these things also. But at the core of what we do, this is what we're about. We must do this. This is our calling in ethnic studies. This is something that we don't ever work around. We examine colonialism historically and how it impacts us today. We examine the historical construction of race. Does anybody want to shout out what they think the definition of race is? And I won't eyeball my students too hard. Who thinks they know what race is? It's okay to shout it out.
Power.
Power, okay. Power for who? Whom? White people. What about people of color? Where do they fit in the race discussion?
Well, we have a black president, so how's white power such a thing? And we have an attorney general that's also black.
We have a black president, black attorney general, Eric Holder. We have black people in positions of power. Does that mean, but is that the definition of race? What is race? How do we understand race? Categorized groups. Are they just categorized as awesome, more awesome? How are they categorized? By color, by physical appearances. And they are placed in a hierarchy of power. Certain people, and also, do we not designate them a hierarchy of things like intelligence? Certain groups are more intelligent. Okay, so this is a good example that we actually have to teach and talk about what race is. Because a lot of us talk about race, but we're not working from the same definition. We probe the meaning of collective and communal identities that people hold. So why do some people identify as Hispanic, others as Chicano, others as Latino, or LGBTQ? How are these identities formed, and what do we do with them, and what meaning do they have in our society? And then, and this is so crucial, we study our community's creative and intellectual products, both the past and the present. And this is important because for historically marginalized communities, many times the only thing students of color learn about themselves in their K-12 education is that they were 3/5 of a human being, or that supposedly they had a nice meal with some pilgrims one day, right? We don't learn about the fact that we created math, science, astronomy. The first vaccination was created by an enslaved African-American man during the American Revolution. Okay, these are the things that we don't teach and we don't know. So how can we expect students of color to think that they're great if they don't know that their ancestors were great and that they did great things and that they made this country, and they also, that even when they were oppressed, they fought for their liberation and their freedom. And that there's no such thing as a happy slave, no matter what Django tells us, okay? But there's a couple videos, and I'm just going to throw out there what they are, and I'll share this PowerPoint if people are interested. But one video is of Marshawn Lynch on Conan. Did anybody see that? Okay. And he's talking about, Conan asked him, how do you feel about this Kaepernick thing? And he's like, I support it. And then he physically stands up and he says, I would rather see him take a knee than stand up, put his hands up, and get shot. Plain and simple. He made it real clear where he was coming from. The other video I was going to show a short clip of was of a woman named Tommie Laren or something. Anybody seen that Tommie Laren video where she supposedly destroys Kaepernick? Well, the argument represents a really important, the other side of the spectrum of angry people who are angry with Kaepernick, who think that he should be grateful to be here, who tell him that he should go somewhere else if he doesn't like it. And that perspective is important because a lot of people hold it. At the same time that people were burning his jersey, 2 weeks later, his jersey is the most sought after jersey. These are the perspectives. This is the crisis that we're talking about. That there are so many people all over the spectrum. Some super down, like G1 wearing her 49ers. Others who are like, I support his right because I believe in free speech, but I don't agree with his tactics. These are the conversations that we hear about what he's doing today. So when we use an ethnic studies framework, there's a few things that we need to know. That first and foremost, it is our responsibility to use what we know. I hope my students know this, that what they learn in our class, I expect them to go use in the world. That I expect them that when we talk about, and at the core of my teaching philosophy is growing empathy, that if nothing else, they walk away from our class knowing about the experiences of diverse communities so that when they're nurses, they may be able to connect with somebody more. When they're doctors, when they're teachers, if they become an educator, say they become a 5th grade teacher and they have this kid who's really acting out, that they remember our chapter on educational inequity and how young boys of color are stereotyped and are treated differently by their oftentimes white teachers, for maybe sent away to get a referral or sent home for the same exact hyperactivity that their young white counterparts don't get sent home for. So maybe when they become teachers, they think that, hey, this kid's acting out. Maybe I should check in on him. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe something happened at home, right? Again, this is coming back to we have a responsibility to use what we know. And it was actually intended to be used and utilized as a tool. It was never meant to just be an intellectual activity, something where we philosophize about oppression. No, it was actually meant to be put into action. And then that we must use that to address whatever crisis that we're in. Because unfortunately, we're kind of always in crisis, right? There's going to be people who are oppressed and have not yet resisted. Then there's moments of protest. Then there's freakouts by the dominant society about why these people are protesting. Why are they out in the street? Why are they so angry? What can we do with their anger? Be more scared? Put more police on the streets? And it helps us understand the world. It helps us strengthen the empathy that we already have. As we talked about before, we're all empathetic beings. Okay? But it helps us strengthen that to understand people from backgrounds who are different than our own. Next, it helps us find ways to take action and to use our agency. So if you are an athlete, knowing that one day you are going to be on a stage, on a field, people are going to be looking up to you. We see what has happened with Kaepernick's protests. It started off as something where he was getting a lot of hate. All of a sudden, all across the country, high schools, junior highs, college teams, white allies, professional athletes are taking a knee. And they're not taking a knee to make attention to themselves. They're taking a knee to show solidarity, to let him know that he's not alone. And to wake America up, that it's not just him. He's not just some crazy man over there saying this. That actually we feel this way too. And he's inspired us to act. So what's at stake? I want to shout out. What do you think is at stake today when we talk about race? When the way you're feeling about race today, just shout it out. What's at stake for our world, for our community?
Justice.
Justice. What else?
Change.
Change. What was it?
Peace.
Peace. What was it? Equality.
Safety.
Safety.
Opportunity.
opportunities. Donald Trump, I just heard Donald Trump. Donald Trump's at stake. We're all at stake. Okay, these are the things we're talking about. Our political, who stays in this country? Who might leave? Who might be deported? It's my argument that we actually can't continue down this path. It's not sustainable. Dehumanization, environmental degradation, exploitation, and violence are not sustainable ways of living. We can't just run our earth into the ground forever. We actually need clean water to drink and air to breathe. And we need people to feel included in society. Or guess what? There will actually be a bigger revolt if we don't figure out a way to include people, to make them feel heard and validated. So let's practice this, okay? Boom, we're gonna start. These are our 2 little mini lessons, okay? August 26th, almost a month ago, Colin Kaepernick took a knee, decided he wasn't gonna stand for the national anthem, and he said he wasn't gonna stand because he can't stand for and show pride for a flag and for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. Oh man, people did not like that. People were angry. It was not cute, okay? It was scary. I was like, oh man, this guy, I'm worried for him. But then we just keep getting more evidence to support his argument. People say, oh, what is he talking about? Terrence Crutcher this week. Car dies on his way home from community college. How many of us have had our car die on the road? I know mine did a couple times when I was a student here. Had an old beat up car, broke down. But in America, what it means to be a black man and your car breaks down, you put your emergency lights on, it's light outside, it's not even dark. And people call 911 because our fear, anti-blackness is so real in our society. We are so scared because of the stereotypes we have been told for hundreds of years about black men being violent, aggressive, we can't trust, we better get away. Lord knows nobody pulled over to help him. And not only did nobody pull over to help him, but not only 1 police car show up, 2, 3, 4 police cars show up, and a helicopter. And what does the person in the helicopter say? He looks like a bad dude. He was just standing there next to his broke down car. Got out of his car because the hood was smoking. Nobody wants to be in a smoking car. That was the only thing he was guilty of, was trying to protect his own life, get out of his car, wait for some help. Okay, he was tased and then he was shot, unarmed. This is what Kaepernick is talking about. Tyree King, 13 years old, shot in the back, running away from the police. People go, why is he running away from the police? Why don't people just explain themselves? Why do you have to run? Because when you see Tamir Rice and so many countless others being shot by the police, you run because you're scared.
It's because he was him and 2 other people were attacking the person, and then that guy called the cops. They described that.
The details.
To the cops. The cops saw them, and they started chasing after them.
So when the police chase you...
Hold up. Sorry. They go to a back alley, and what he does is he reaches for...
You got 10 seconds.
Is wrong.
But it's... where's your evidence
from? His pants, or his waist belt, and he pulls out a BB gun. So if you're a cop, you see a person pulling out a gun, it's either your life or theirs.
So first of all, these details are not confirmed yet. So that's why I haven't gone into the Actually, they're not. They're being investigated. This just happened. So this is the other thing. We can't jump to assumptions. The fact of the matter is that young, non-people of color children run around and play with guns all the time, and they don't get shot and killed because they're not adultified the way that African American and Latino children are. People look, so many studies have been done, and I'll share them with you. People have looked at how we perceive young boys of color. And the way in our society, we perceive them as adults. And so if you're a young African American boy and you are perceived as an adult, that means you are perceived as a threat. Keith Lamont Scott, 2 days ago. Yes, in the back.
I think you need to add black women to that as well.
Absolutely. Black women, trans women.
If I'm stopped by police, my heart has palpitations. Black women get killed by police officers as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Black queer women also started Black Lives Matter. Right? So it's important to acknowledge who is at the forefront of this movement and also who the victims are. Thank you so much for bringing up that point. Black women, trans people in the trans community. These are the people who are being disproportionately experiencing violence at the hands of police. Keith Lamont Scott, I talked about him a little bit earlier. So, how the past informs the present. From a critical ethnic studies perspective, we understand these events based on history. Starting with the slave codes in the 1660s. This is the moment that race is introduced into law. For the first times, we see the words white and black in the law, differentiating how people will be treated by the law. We also see the beginning of the policies where African Americans are considered property and no longer human, and that their children born to black women, would be considered property. It's not separate from this emerging moment of crisis when we, 100 years later after the slave codes, we've now fought for our independence, created a revolution, established a constitution, and in that very constitution, we have this conflict where we're talking about freedom, motivation, inalienable rights, at the exact time that slavery is building up our economy. 100 years later, we have the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery, but there's an important clarification that there's this group who can still be technically enslaved, and those are people who are convicted of a crime. And that's important today because we see that for people who were born in 2001, for all men, you have a 1 in 9 chance of going to jail. For white men, 1 in 17. For black men, 1 in 3. And for our youth, when we're talking about youth and we're talking about young people losing their lives, we have youth being incarcerated at a rate we've never seen because we have people being incarcerated at a rate we've never seen. We have over 7,000 youth of this 34,000 in this image who are being incarcerated because of a technical violation. Oftentimes, they were too poor to pay their bail, too poor to pay for their drug test, or they failed their drug test. And so we send them back to jail. And the point of this conversation about mass incarceration is that when we think about the effect that it has on our society and the crisis it's created, it tears families apart. It means that a provider for that family is no longer there to work and provide economically for their family. And it also just means that people lose their parents and parents lose their children. So let's go over some of the stats. We imprison more people than any other country in the world. Most of us know that. We have over 2.4 million people behind bars, an increase of 500% since 1971 when Nixon started the war on drugs. 500%. And anywhere between 1/3 and 1/5, depending on the state or the time or the year of those people, are in jail for non-violent drug offenses. So there's a direct correlation to the war on drugs. 75% of people in state prison in New York are there for drug conviction, are people of color, when we know the data shows that whites and blacks use drugs at about the same rate. And if you don't believe me, let's talk a little bit about how police decide who they're going to police. Okay, so we know that they police communities of color because they're dangerous and there's lots of crime and people are doing bad things. But what we also know is that they don't police college towns, frat row, sorority row, and anybody who's ever known anybody who went to college knows that there's lots of drugs going on in those communities because affluent kids have money for drugs and they like recreational drugs. And they're using drugs at the same rate as young people of color most often, but how they're being policed decides who the police pursue and who they pull over and check in their pockets and what they have in their pockets. Over the last 2 decades, state spending on prison grew 6 times. It was 6 times higher than education. So for every single one of us in this room, this matters. This is our Pell Grants. This is our wages. This is the potential to get a raise or to not get a raise, or if we're going to take classes or not, because there's no longer the same kind of state funding, or the kind of classes that are offered, how many classes that are offered, how long we're going to be on that wait list. All of this impacts us. And from 97 to 2007, we saw an 800% increase of women being incarcerated. That means mothers, sisters, sometimes single parents, which means that their children are now in the foster care system. And the foster care system is a hard place to be. It's a hard place to survive. And so again, we're tearing families apart. And this is where I want us to practice our empathy. If you're questioning whether you believe this, I will provide you with all of my resources and stats and data, and I would love to do that. Because I know that part of building empathy is believing it. You actually have to believe that this is a problem. And if you don't believe that this is a problem, we're going to continue to make excuses for why we shouldn't do anything about it. So every year, $70 billion is spent to incarcerate people and to monitor them after they've been released from incarceration. So let's think about all the ways that we could use that money better. Pell Grants for everyone in the room, okay? Free college for everyone in the room. All the different ways that this would benefit our lives and our society. And so these are depressing stats, right? What can we do about it? Coming back from a critical ethnic studies perspective, it always comes back to what can I do about it? What can people do about it? And what people are doing right now is we are living in the moment of the largest prisoner inmate strike in history, in United States history. How many people have heard about it? That's right, because nobody is covering it. Why do you think people don't cover a prison strike? Shout it out. Won't get the money. What else? It might spread. Cause more damage. Let's think about empathy. Do we care about prisoners? The same way we care about our child at home or young children. Society does not care about prisoners because we've bought into the mentality that they're there for a good reason, that they're probably all rapists and have done all these horrible things. Well, the facts show us that that's not true. So again, we have to think about the people who are living in solitary confinement. That in most industrialized countries, they don't do solitary confinement because it's been proven to be inhumane. So what are the alternatives? We have something that's going on. We have all of this oppressive and depressing stats. The alternatives are that some people are doing it differently. In Germany and the Netherlands, they incarcerate people about 1/10 the rate we do. But there's a reason for that, because they have alternatives to incarceration. They use community service, fines. In this country, you can be incarcerated for not paying your parking tickets. That disproportionately hurts the poor of all backgrounds. You're too poor, you can't be free in this country. So they find alternative ways. In the Netherlands, only 5% of prison sentences are more than 2 years long. And the reason that matters is because in this country, things like minimum mandatory sentences, we throw people in jail and we throw them there forever, and we throw away the key. And these are entire communities that have been impacted for generations because of this. It doesn't have to be like that. If somebody is an addict, there are alternative ways to treating that. And it's a joke that we call it the correction of rehabilitation, because very few people are coming out of our prisons rehabilitated. And lastly, social integration and reintegration upon getting out of prison. In this country, we stigmatize ex-inmates so much. It's hard for them to get a job. How can we expect people to stay out of jail when it's hard to get a job, when it's hard for people to trust you? Because our society tells us that if you've been to jail, you probably did something really bad, even if the evidence doesn't support that. So at the same time that we have the largest prison strike going on in U.S. history, we also have the largest strike by Native American people in U.S. history. Over 90 tribes have come to support the North Dakota Sioux in their struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is supposed to run through their territory, which is sacred burial grounds. But even more important, they are concerned about the water being polluted. And last week we had 2 pipes burst and pollute bodies of water. So this is not a fantasy, a fear that is not based in reality. This is a real fear based on lots of data that shows that these pipelines are flawed all over the world, and they're disproportionately impacting poor and indigenous communities. So when we see videos like this, when I teach this topic in my class, and we see a video of a mercenary using a dog against a protester, of a dog with a bloody mouth who's just bitten somebody, we can't not connect it to the picture of Columbus using his dogs for the very same purpose against the Arawak people in the Caribbean. These are the connections we need to make because they're there, because they're real. These aren't fabricated. There is a historical connection between how we treat indigenous people in this society. And Columbus was looking for gold, and today we're looking for black gold. We're looking for oil. Native Americans have experienced everything from genocide, loss of land, broken treaties, moved and isolated on reservations, boarding schools, forced assimilation. The impact of colonialism has resulted in Native Americans having the poorest health of any group in the United States, the highest rate of diabetes, and for the Pima tribe, the highest rate of diabetes in the world. Young Native Americans are more likely to kill themselves than any other group. And more Native Americans die by injury and preventable injuries like car crashes, being hit as a pedestrian or fire, because there's very few hospitals on reservations, which means they have to go far to get help, and it takes a long time for help to get to them. We have people talking about the connection between the killing of the buffalo and the destruction of the land. And again, we see women at the forefront of these movements. Just like we see women at the forefront of Black Lives Matter, we see women at the forefront of the No DAPL protests, talking about water is life. And water isn't life just for Native Americans. Water is life for all of us. They are doing service for all of us. And that's also why we need to realize our connection with their struggle. That we are water. We are made of mostly water, and we need water to survive. So lastly, we see a growing solidarity. We see people coming from all over the Pacific Islands, from Hawaii, from everywhere, and tribes coming to support their brothers and sisters. And we see Black Lives Matter on the front line in North Dakota. So let's end it off here with what can we do? We could write to our politicians. We could send supplies to No DAPL, right? We can advocate for the protection of environment over pipelines. And all of this is in service with the purpose of creating social justice. And the vision for social justice is that we can actually have a society where all members are physically and psychologically safe. And I hope the psychological part makes sense after this presentation, because it's the fear that communities of color live with when it comes to policing, when it comes to all of these issues, to access to clean water, that's very real. And psychological fear has an impact on our physical health. So how can we heal? There's these next steps. We're talking about restorative justice. What does restorative justice mean? It means owning up to the harm that we have actually caused so that we can heal it. It means that we move away from punitive practices and policies. And we're going to look real quickly at Yamamoto's 4 steps for racial justice. The first being recognition. That's what we're doing here today. You've already all done the first step. You've started recognizing the problem, that harm has been caused by racism. Now we have to talk about the responsibility, acknowledging who is responsible for that harm, because that's an important process, part of the healing process. Next, we have to talk about reconstruction. So we acknowledge that there's harm, we acknowledge that somebody's responsible for that harm, and we have to start to act on it. And his example, the first example for reconstruction, is often an apology. An apology is free, people, okay? We can apologize for free. And lastly, reparations. That's the big scary word that people don't like to hear. But the reality is we've given reparations before in this country. For Japanese Americans who survived internment, in 1988, we gave the survivors $20,000 each. Now that is nothing compared to what they lost. They lost their homes, their businesses, everything, years of their life. But it's an example that we have done this before. This is not something that we can't imagine in our future. So we'll end with that. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Leave. I think it is very nice if you can give Dr. Delgado big hand.